One. Good evening, everyone. My name is Deni Yupinto Dinopit, and I'm here going to present my thesis under the title Strategic Motivations Behind Russia's Deployment of the Wagner Group. Before we start, we need to know several backgrounds. First, the emergence of private military companies, especially in Russia. Since the 2010s, they are increasingly use PMC like the Wagner Group to project their influence and gain plausible deniability, making them some kind of inseparable component of modern warfare in their threat repertoire. And Russia's strategic reason for using PMC is to offset those systemic weaknesses that they have, such as lower GDP than US and China, leveraging plausible deniability to avoid accountability and international condemnations for its geopolitical action. And thirdly, Wagner integration and Russia strategic culture, where we need to know that Wagner Group itself has evolved into a paramilitary arm of the Russian state by their integration into military operations in Ukraine. It reflects Russia's strategic culture that likes to blur the line between war and peace and also legitimizing the use of proxy forces in gray zones. Problem statement. The core problem is to understand why Russia, unlike Western states, deeply relies on private military companies like the Wagner Group to project power despite possessing a really strong conventional military, and how this non-state actor became pivotal to its strategic policy. Research question. How does Russia's strategic culture explain its employment of Wagner Group? And we continue on to the purpose of this research, where this research aims to explain how Russia's strategic culture shapes its decision to employ the Wagner Group as a tool of statecraft by analyzing Russia's historically conditioned belief about war, international relations, and the legitimacy of force. This study seeks to demonstrate that the use of Wagner is not merely a tactical improvisation, but as an expression of those enduring strategic preferences that is already embedded in Russia's worldview. Research benefit, we have two. First is the academic benefit, as this research aims to explain how international structures compel states to use non-state actors like PMCs as their security policy tools, highlighting their unique roles in foreign affairs. And second is the practical benefit. It provides a reference for future scholars on defense and non-state actor, as it demonstrates how countries like Russia are driven to employ non-conventional methods such as armed private entities for foreign policy execution. Literature review, we have five. First is The Role of Private Military Companies and Defense Policy and Military Operations by Aris Sarjito. Second is Russia Use of Semi-State Security Forces, The Case of the Wagner Group by Kimberly Martin. Third, Wagner Group, Comparing and Contextualizing the Russian Monster by Christopher Spirin. Fourth, The Role of Private Military Companies in Defense Policy and Military Operation by Konstantin Kurilev. And lastly, Comprehensive Security Approach in Response to Russian Hybrid Warfare, Tuka Elonheimo. All of them are talking about how Russia itself using PMC and how those PMC operates without asking how Russia decides to use Wagner Group in the very first place, and how those their enduring beliefs, enduring views, their strategy culture explains it all and making it all make sense after everything they have gone through, that they decide to use Wagner Group, and it's going to be crystallized on this thesis and will be the novelty of this research. Let's jump into the conceptual framework. We're only going to have one in here, which is the strategic culture analysis by Alastair Ian Johnston. Strategic culture, as explained by Johnston, it's a state behavior that is shaped not only by material constraint, but by historically embedded beliefs about war, power, and the legitimacy of force. We can see that why does Russia, that we can see have a really similar military power between Russia and China, we can see that why both of them not going to apply a same reaction toward any kind of external stimuli coming from the international order and something like that. And that is one of the main reasons why this kind of framework exists. They're trying to explain to us how strategic culture itself is something that is going to compel a nation to do some kind of reaction toward an external stimuli because of their already historically embedded beliefs about the three variables that we are going to talk today. What are those variables? First is the nature of war in the international system. Second, the nature of international relation. Third, and the legitimacy and efficacy of force. All of the nations have different perspective about three of those variables, and we are going to see how Russia viewpoint of those three variables is going to affecting and shaping up their decision to use Wagner Group as their state repertoire. Research method, we are going to use the descriptive analysis method with research scope 2014 to 2023. 2014, basically the first major appearance of Wagner Group in international relation, and up to 2023, where the group disbanded and absorbed into the Russian military and absorbed directly to Russian military because their leader is found is found deceased after an accident. And unit and level of analysis, where our unit of analysis is the Russia use of private military companies, which going to be explained by our unit of explanation is the Russia strategy culture. And for this research, we are going to do a level of analysis of only state level. For data collection and technique, we are going to do library research with secondary data, or data analysis and processing is a process tracing method, while we are going to explaining the already existing outcome by looking back at how the process of those outcome are possible by following our footsteps on why Russia decides on using Wagner Group in the very first place. Our thesis structure as follows. Chapter 1, Introduction. Chapter 2 will be Russia's use of private military companies and the Wagner Group. Chapter 3, Russia's strategic culture. Chapter 4, Analyzing Russia's strategic reliance on Wagner Group. And ends with the Chapter 5, the conclusion. Let's start with our Chapter 2, titled Russia's use of private military companies and the Wagner Group. What is actually Wagner Group? Wagner Group is the first modern Russian private military contractor with global footprints, as it operates across Ukraine, Syria, Libya, and Africa, where Wagner Group itself functions as a hybrid state instrument where they are going to fulfill three major points in at the same time. First is the military and political and economic. While Wagner Group itself is currently registered as a body, some kind of corporation, it enables some kind of plausible deniability and asymmetric power projection. Fourth, our timeline for our Wagner Group here, where in 2014 it's their first appearance during Donbas conflict, and it's going to continue again from 2015 till 2018, where they are heavily mobilized in Syria, supporting the Assad regime. And 2018 and 2021, they are being deployed in Africa to support authoritarian power there, where they are trying to make some kind of resource deals with the warlords there in order to benefiting Russia. And lastly, in 2022 and 2023, we can see Wagner Group major role in Ukraine, as we already heard that they are actually making their kind of appearance in that conflict as the main shock troop for the Russian army to clear the way, and as they are gaining so many victories over and over again while taking a really heavy toll on them, especially in Bakhmut, to where they are able to recapture Bakhmut from Ukraine at that time. After looking at Wagner Group, we can see that there are three strategic functions of them. First is the military, where they're becoming taking a combat role as a force multiplier for the Russian conventional army, and they are becoming the one of the major repertoire for Russian state for proxy warfare. And for geopolitics, they have function in geopolitical too, as they are able and as the extension of Russian influence abroad, as an as they are going to be expedite strategic entry into a nation that Russia really want to exert their dominance or influence to. And lastly, the economic, as they are fulfilling the role as a resource extraction deals, and they evading sanction and those elite network funding coming from the corporation itself. We can see that they are fulfilling those three functions well. And we need to know why, in the end of the day, Russia used them. It's their deniability and ambiguity in the conflict zones that makes them really suitable to avoid some kind of responsibility and reduce political and human cost exposure, where Russia really wants to keep their main army or the conventional army at their home while they're delegating the job for expeditionary forces to the job as expeditionary forces to Wagner Group, and they can expand their global reach without formal deployment as they are not actually registered as a formal members of the Russian conventional army, when they can able to support authoritarian partner and friendly regimes, especially in Africa and Middle East for Russia, and they can enable to generate revenue and patronage for those elite networks. And after that, we are going to talk about the chapter 3, Russia strategic culture. As I explained before, strategy culture is as enduring historical belief and assumption shaping how a state interprets threats and use forces. And it explained that the behavior of a nation is not only going to be calculated from their only material power and rational calculation. We believe those experience for a nation in the past really shapes how they are going to perceive any kind of threats or any kind of obstacle that they are going to face in the future, and those kind of things has becoming a pattern and in the end of the day becoming a culture. We can see the strategic culture in Russia. It can be explored in three layers. First is in the imperial era, where the Romanov bloodline reigns. We know that they are really proud of their identity as a nation with a Eurasian heritage, and they have a really crazy autocracy where the king rules them all, and the militarized frontier where they keep all of their borders full with the presence of their army in order to ward off any kind of possible invaders and something like that. And this kind of behavior translates much more into the Soviet era, where after World War II, we believe that they are able to cement their name as the winner of World War II and see themselves as a great power on par with the United States. And they have this kind of security paranoia where they are always under the assumption that the Western will attack them any minute, any second now. And it driven by the ideological mission to eradicate communism. And they also have their mission, ideological mission to spread their their influence abroad. And they really, after World War II, they have this kind of sacrifice culture where they are really romanticizing being killed on the field, in the field of your duty, or being on war is something that is really honorable. And so that is some kind of martyrdom that has cemented into their strategic culture. And we know that after the Cold War ends, we know that Russia has become a proper democratic country, but in the end of the day, they still feel threatened by the existence of NATO, and they still want to restore their identity as great power, and they resent of those Western order, and they really want to restore their glory once more, and they really want to project their influence be to offset the aforementioned shortcomings by using this kind of hybrid power projection. After looking at the historical context of Russian strategic culture, there are several key traits that we can take. First is the war as seen as continuous and inevitable, where it demands a permanent readiness and mobilization mindset as they believe their enemies will attack any second, any minute now, and they need to be ready to ward off those invaders. And they see that they have some kind of zero-sum worldview where they are really reluctant to be cooperative and working together with the Western, as they see NATO itself as seen as a threat, and they want to balance through those kind of threats is using asymmetric tools such as proxies, such as trying to make themselves as a new polar in the international order and something like that. Force as legitimate and effective as the aforementioned aforementioned sacrifice culture, it makes heroic violence, and diplomacy itself needs to be coercive without any wiggle room for any cooperations and something like that. And they really like to do their jobs if in ambiguity. While we can see from hybrid warfare, deniable assets, and those two of things fits the boots for PMC. And lastly, the key threats is the restoration of status. What do I mean by restoration of status here? They really want to have those great power nostalgia and the glory that they have during their imperial era and the Soviet era. And they really want the people now, and people affirm their position as one of the great powers in the world. And that is one of the things that makes the shaping the decision in making any kind of foreign policy the decision. And after that, let's jump into the chapter 4, where we are going to analyze Russia's strategic reliance on Wagner Group. There are three goals here. We need to empirically demonstrate how Russia's strategic culture shaped its reliance on Wagner Group, and we're going to apply Johnston three variables to contemporary Russian behavior, and we need to connect the historical belief structure into their strategic worldview that translates into the policy instrument that they are going to choose in order to combat those obstacles. Let's see our framework for analysis here. There are three variables: is the nature of war, nature of IR, and nature then legitimacy of force. And those kind of variable follows a question. As the first one is, those Russia believe war is unavoidable, and we are going to test that by looking at their signal of permanent readiness, where they are ready to strike 24/7. And second is, those Russia see world politics as zero sum, and it's going to be proven by their very stern anti-Western stance. So it means that every losses that is being inflicted upon Russia is a gain for the Western states. That's why they do not really believe in a positive sum game in world politics. And lastly, is violence seen as normal and moral? And we can see from their already existing narrative about the cultural glorification of force, we believe they are going to do anything in order to fulfill their goals. And that's why using violence and coercive action is actually really okay for them. Let's see the variable one, war as inevitable. We need to know that the Russia perception of war, we know they have some kind of historical trauma because of Mongols. They are invading Russia during the imperial era, as with Napoleon, and the most recent one, contemporary one, is Hitler in World War II. And because of those historical trauma, their security culture is rooted in permanent external threat, and they see war viewed not as anomaly but recurring condition of state existence. They are under pressure and under some kind of paranoia all the time, and they believe that for those, in order to combat those obstacles, they are have some kind of preference for something that is actually really available all the time for constant mobilization, readiness, and strategic deception. How Wagner fits in here? Because we know that Wagner is operating as a forward shock force in Ukraine and Syria, and they are actually able to make Russia doing military action without any kind of formal war declaration in order to avoid the repercussion that happens if they are actually joining the war in the very first place. It means that Wagner itself is reflecting Russia's belief in endless geopolitical struggle, requiring them sustain coercive tools. Second is the zero sum view of the international relation, in order to test that, let's see the Russian strategic outlook, where they are having some kind of resentment toward NATO after even after Cold War, after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they are very anxious with NATO expansion, and there are no buffer state, there are no some kind of buffer between them and NATO itself. They have some kind of fears that the enemy is at his doorstep, something like that. And they see multipolarity is as a restoration, not cooperation. They want to make themselves and differentiate themselves with the current existing polars, which is the Western states, and they really want to make themselves as unique, and they are trying its best to one up them. And they are really distrust. of current international system where they believe that the West itself is trying to constrain Russia by sanctions, by any kind of diplomatic action, something like that. They really not believing in cooperation in the end of the day. And we need and how it fits with Wagner Group, because Wagner Group itself is used to counter those Western influence in Africa, Middle East, Eastern Europe, wherever they are being deployed, and they are trying to make some kind of foothold for for Russia influence itself. They are becoming a way for Russia to expand their influence abroad. And we need to know that the nature of Wagner Group itself is the deniability, because they are very deniable. Russia itself really can say that, oh, it's not me, and it's not me that sent it, and they can avoid those kind of repercussion. And uh, and and because of they can avoid sanctions or any kind of accountability of those actions, the Russia itself can compete without any fear of conflict escalation that are going to threaten them. And lastly, they are trying to support for authoritarian regime. The authoritarian regime is polar opposite with what the Western states really want. And Russia itself really wants to make benefit on those spheres of influence, and they are trying to insert themselves as ally for the enemies of the Western states. And that's how they are going to increase their influence in the end of the day. And Wagner itself operationalized competitive balancing against those Western influence. Lastly, and the legitimacy and efficacy of force. We need to know that Russian cultural orientation to violence is really similar with the aforementioned culture before, as they see violence as noble, necessary, and identity affirming. And those kind of military heroism is really central to national myth, like World War II cult and martyrdom, that they are becoming a great nation because of the sacrifice of their army and the nation and the people itself. And they see, because of those, they see that in order to gain something, you are not going to having it easy, and they believe that coercion itself seen as a valid tool for order building to make people stay in line. Why does it matter with their decision to make Wagner Group? Because Wagner Group itself has a really brutal but politically justified operation around Syria, Mali, Central African Republic, and Ukraine. And because of those actions are deniable and they can just not being accountable for it, they see that it's an acceptable cause without any kind of political liability, that in the end of the day blurred the civilian and military boundaries, and they can do some state sanctioned ruthlessness. As Wagner Group itself exemplifies Russia belief that force is efficient, legitimizing, and morally defensible. And we can see the cultural expression. You can see Wagner itself as a cultural expression, as Wagner Group can be seen as a natural continuation of Russia's strategic worldview that is shaped by centuries of militarized identity and competitive statecraft. And for the cultural features, we can see that their permanent conflict mindset, and it's going to translate as as they prefer to use Wagner Group because of its rapid deployment and high attrition tolerance. Second is zero somewhat few, and they are very anti-Western itself. That's why they are going to use Wagner to exert their influence without actually including their formal military. And lastly, the legitimacy of force. We can see that Wagner Group itself operates with using a violent coercion, where political warfare like blackmail and something like that is actually normalized. For conclusion, Russia's reliance on the strategic Russia's reliance on the Wagner Group stems from deeply rooted strategic beliefs, not merely tactical or economic incentives. By applying the three variable model from Johnston, it demonstrates how Russia interprets war as perpetual, perceives international politics as zero sum, and views coercive force as legitimate. These beliefs produce a consistent preference for deniable violence and making Wagner a culturally rooted state tool. And for recommendation, while strategic culture provides a compelling interpretative lens, future research may benefit from combining cultural analysis with leadership psychology, civil military institutional dynamics, or economic network analysis. Comparative studies across great powers could further clarify whether the integration of PMC reflects a global shift in strategic practice or just a distinctly Russian phenomenon. I think that's all from me. Thank you for watching. Thank you, everyone.